I am taking advantage of the Wednesday that I'm back home and streaming live to you. So welcome everyone, just getting the stream going here and making sure that I got everything set up the way I want and that I can see all your wonderful comments, and it looks like I can. All right, let's switch over. We're going to be doing today. So today I'm actually testing a few things in my streaming setup. Honestly, I wasn't going to stream today because I'm testing things in my stream setup, but I figured I could test live and give out some tutorials and information as well. So I have a lot of people that are already asking questions over on YouTube. I'm going to get to some of those in just a second. And I've had people, tweet questions and ask questions, direct message, and I'll get to as many questions as I can. And just so you know, you can take advantage of the chat or the comment section of whatever platform you're watching this on and post a question. I will try to watch all of them, and I have 3 screens I got to watch, but I'll try and watch all of them and make sure I can get to your specific questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my computer. And that way, hey, Mikey, how are you? I'm going to switch over to my computer so that way I can see, you can see what I'm doing and what I'm working with. And we're going to start with some of the questions that I already got before this even started, because people have already asked questions. So let's go ahead and switch over to the computer. Now I'm in Lightroom. I'm in Lightroom Classic CC. I've got Lightroom CC open as well. And I've also got Photoshop open in the background. And with that said, we're going to just take questions across the board, not only in those applications, but in photography in general. So one of the questions I got right off the bat, let me go up to it. How do I compress an image in Photoshop? The PNG file, which PNG file I'm editing, is too big and slowing down my PC. All right, so this is a catch-22. It's a good question, and you have to weigh the difference between speed / quality. In other words, if you want to work on a smaller file, that's great. Your computer will be faster, but you're also going to be working with less quality potentially and less resolution. So there is that. So let me show you what I mean. So for example, if I take this picture of Tony here, I believe I shot this with my D810 or my D850, one of the two. Okay, D810. This image is 4,912 pixels by 7,360 pixels. And this will also answer another question that someone asked further down. So I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If I go into my Lightroom preferences for this photo, and I go to external editing, the default resolution is 240. At 16 pixels or 16-bit depth. So the other question I got was, can I change that resolution? Can I make it higher? Yeah, you can make it, I probably wouldn't go any higher than 300. So 240 to 300 are, that range is good for printing. I certainly wouldn't go any lower because I would keep the default at 240 as high as 300, because if you want to go lower, you can always do that, either in Photoshop or exporting the image out of Lightroom. So I would keep this where it is, unless you really have a reason to take it up to 300. I wouldn't take it up any higher than that. But if you got a reason to go higher, you can. All right, now, so what that means is when I open up this image, I'm gonna hit Command E on the Mac, that would be Control E on Windows. That will open up, and it's not gonna present me any dialog box, or it shouldn't, because that's a raw file, so it's just going to open up a copy of it anyway. So it's not going to, you can't edit the original raw file. It's just going to open a copy. If it had been a JPEG, a TIFF, a PSD, or anything like that, then it would ask me, do you want to open up a copy with the Lightroom adjustments, a copy without the Lightroom adjustments, or open up the original? But raw files don't have that option, so it opened it up. Now, if I go to my image size, and this is where all of this question comes in. This file, in its current form, is about 206 megs of memory to work on this. In other words, I would want a pretty decent, configuration to work on this file. That doesn't mean you can't work on it with a bare minimum of 8 gigs of RAM on a slower, older computer. It just means things will be slower. So the question is, if you don't need that much resolution for what the final output will be for this, then yes, you can downsize it. You can downsize it, and the file that you would be working on would be faster. It would, presumably speed up the whole workflow, especially if you're going to do a lot of layering and a lot of compositing. But then again, you are permanently working with a smaller file. Now you still have a copy, still have the original in Lightroom, so you could always come back and open that up if you needed the full resolution again. But in this case, you take this one down, it is going to make the file smaller. So what do I mean by take it down? Notice that there's a checkbox called resample. So resample right there. If that's checked, which it usually is by default, that means that if I change that number, that resolution, width, and height to be smaller, or the resolution to be smaller, it is making the file smaller. If I change it to be bigger, it's making the file bigger. And bigger doesn't always look better, so because it's having to make up what those pixels should look like. So for example, let's say I take this down to 5,000. Not 500, 5,000. So it went from 206 down to 95.5, so less than half the size. Still going to keep it at 240, but it's going to be a smaller dimension file. And again, this would depend on your needs and what you're going to use this for. Once I click OK, that you even saw the file physically get smaller on screen. So that file is smaller, but it's still a decent enough size, depending on what you're doing, to work on. So all the resolution's there, the quality's there, just at a smaller size, and therefore this file will work faster. Now let's just make a visual change to it. Let's go in and just flip it around. I'm going to free transform it, and I'm going to flip it horizontally so he's looking the other way. All right, and then I'm going to just save it. Now, because I see another question on Facebook, and the question is, from Lightroom, edit Photoshop, and then back to Lightroom, the file expands to an enormous size. Is there any way to reduce that? Okay, so it's around the same question. And here I'm going to save, I already saved it. Let's close it, or I didn't save it. Let's save it now and then close it. And close that one. I don't need that one open. That was one I was working on earlier. And let's go back. All right, so that put the one I just did next to the original. And the question that someone's asking on Facebook is, hey, when I do that, when I take that raw file and open up in Photoshop, do anything to it and save it back, the file I'm saving back is way bigger. Is there any way around that? And it's kind of around the same lines. It depends on, here, I didn't mean to do that. Here, I want to go do this. It depends on what you want. So the original was 4,912 by 7,360. The new one is 3,337 by 5,000. So this is a smaller resolution, but that doesn't mean it's a smaller file, because your raw file is not layered. It's not in a state that's going to make it any bigger than what the camera produced. But when you open it up in Photoshop and you do things to it, especially if you add a layer, just even a simple text layer or duplicate the layer, you are potentially making the file twice as big. Is there any way around that? Try if you want to save it back. Not really. You'd have to save a flattened copy of it, and therefore you would, if you had a lot of layers, you'd lose them all. So guys, if you're going to work with these large megapixel cameras, this one's a I don't know, 40 megapixel camera, I forgot, 45 megapixel camera for the D850. Those are huge files no matter what. And especially once you open them up to edit them and you start adding things to them, they're only going to balloon and get bigger. That's just physics. That's just the way it works. Now you can save a JPEG. You can save out a JPEG that will be smaller because the JPEG is compressed, but then therefore it's also going to lose some quality. Because when you make a JPEG, it's automatically throwing data away to make the file smaller. So that data translates into usually nothing visible to the naked eye, but it depends on what you need. So if I look at these two files as far as size is concerned, because that was the question. The original raw file is 40 megabytes on the hard drive. The new PSD is 169 megabytes, even though I made the resolution smaller, because PSDs and TIFFs are going to be bigger than the original RAW file. That's just, unfortunately, the way the file format works. And again, the only way around that is either keep making the file smaller, which you don't want to do that, or save it as JPEG. But that's really not really, unless you're just saving out that JPEG. For example, let's say I open up this file. Let's go back to it. And let's say that I want to remove something from it or do something to it. So let's open it up again. Here it is. And let's say that I want to remove this button, okay? For whatever reason. I would not want to remove that button normally, but let's say I did. We'll get rid of the button, and the button's gone. And now the remnant of the button is gone. And if I save that file back out, should save a copy, close it. Close it. I thought I closed this one already, but anyway. And now there's a third copy. So there's a third copy of that image. So again, that's saving it as a PSD and making that PSD, you know, whatever size it is. This one's even going to be bigger because I didn't size it down. So 206 megabytes. Now, if we go back and edit that original, and actually, let's go back and do it the other way. Sorry about that. Let's go back and do it from the original. We go back and edit that original one more time, and we do anything like remove that button one more time. Just make my brush bigger and click, and the button's gone. But instead of saving it back to Lightroom, if I go out now and just save as a JPEG or save for web a JPEG, then that JPEG that I'm saving out should be smaller. Let's save it to the desktop. And again, you can control the quality here. I'm just going to leave it on the default. And then I close it from Lightroom, but I don't save any changes. So in other words, I just opened it up, made a change, saved out a copy that I need to be smaller for whatever reason, and then just closed it without making any more changes to it. If I go back out to my operating system now and I look at that image on the desktop, let's go and make this bigger. It should not be 40 megabytes. As a matter of fact, it's only 4.4. So it is a lot smaller than the original, 4.4 megabytes, because it's a JPEG, because JPEGs compress, throw away data, and make the file smaller. So there's, again, no way to really cheat the system if you want to maintain editability with all your layers or quality, as much quality as you can that you got from that RAW file. If that doesn't matter to you, save out JPEGs and they'll be a lot smaller. And this is the other thing you have to look at. Hard drives are really cheap. They have been for years. I would rather have to buy more storage than sacrifice my photography quality. So keep that in mind. Now, there are people that will argue with me and say, well, I only shoot JPEG and they're fine for what I do and they're good enough and they look great. Great. If that works for you, then do that. But I bought, expensive DSLRs. I want the best image quality that they can produce, which is usually going to be shooting in RAW, which usually means big files. So I hope I addressed as many of the resolution questions as I got. All right, next up, let's keep going looking at questions. And I answered two about the one coming off that resolution question from Lightroom. Hopefully I got that one answered too. Yep, okay, so I'm seeing that these are pretty much, either people chiming in on what I just said or asking around the same questions. That's a good question. So Colleen asked this question, and this is one that people have asked for years, and there's some people that are purists and they have to do it this way and they cannot see it any other way. And then there are people that are like me that are really, me and Colleen, that really don't care as much. So Colleen's question is, why would I want something non-destructive when all I have to do is reopen the file again if I really screw up? And that's kind of my workflow for my own work. So let's be clear. If I was doing work for a client, an art director, a colleague, or someone that's liable to come back to me and say, oh, I need you to change this, or I really wished you hadn't done that, or I really wish this were over on the left, or so forth and so on. That's when I'm going to want a non-destructive workflow, because that client's going to come back and keep making changes, and I want my changes to be easy as possible. I don't want to start over again. That's when non-destructive workflows come in. So her question was, like, for example, like I told you earlier, we did, two more copies of Tony, and we still have the original. So if I screwed up, messed these 2 copies up, I can always go back and open up another copy of the original. Now, starting over isn't always fun depending on how much work you've done. That's the other thing. If you've done tons of layers, tons of compositing, tons of edits on that, then you probably want to save all that work so that you don't have to start from scratch. But that's typically when I'm doing work for someone else. If I'm retouching this photo for me, there isn't a lot of non-destructive I need, because I'm not liable to go back, me personally, to my own work and say, oh, I should do this a different way, or tomorrow I'll look at it and do it a different way. I'm not revisiting files that I work on to go back over and over and over and work on them. If I were, like I'm doing a graphic design, or I'm doing a project, or doing something like that, yes, I want a non-destructive workflow. But for a retouch on a portrait, usually once I retouch it and close it, rarely do I ever go back to it and need those layers back again. So it really depends on you, what kind of client you have, if you're the client, how much you tend to revisit and go back and work on things. And if all of those are the answer, yes, Colleen, by all means, the folks that answer those questions, yes, that's me, then they should have a non-destructive workflow as much as possible. Now, what does that mean, non-destructive? If you do edits in Lightroom, whether it's Classic or Lightroom CC, that workflow is non-destructive. So for example, let's say I go into this photo and I can see a bunch of things wrong with it. For example, the cropping is off here. The white balance actually was correct. Here, let me reset this one back to the way it really was. See if we can get a reset going. Okay, this one is reset as far as it's going to go. So the cropping is off. I don't like that yellow band on the microphone. She's got shadows under her eyes because of just bad lighting. They're just some things that I would want to correct in this photo. So if I start doing that process, so for example, let's go to our crop, and we're going to unlock the crop. We're just going to bring that down a little bit to crop off that little edge that was up there, and maybe rotate it a little bit, like so. There we go. Well, okay, and let's say I continue working on it, and then somebody comes back and say, oh, that little thing in the edge in the corner, that was a decoration. We really need that. That's what I mean by you'd want it to be non-destructive, because that person said, bring something back that you did, and therefore you would want to be able to go back and do that easily without having to start all over from scratch. So, let's say they hadn't said that yet. Let's say I keep going. Then I go in and I say, oh, I really don't like that yellow. Now I would take this into Photoshop, but let's say I do it all in Lightroom. I go to my spot removal tool. I make my brush a little bit bigger. Oh. Healing brush in Lightroom is not as precise as the one in Photoshop, but let's give it a shot. All right, paint that in. It's going to guess somewhere weird. I'm going to tell it, nope, get it from the top part of the microphone. It didn't have it. Okay, great. Now that's a second edit. Then I go in and maybe I use my adjustment brush. I set my adjustment brush to exposure, which it already is, and I come in the eyes and just brighten them up a little bit. It's probably a little too much, but I can dial it back down. Great. So now I've done 3 edits. And now somebody comes back and says, hey, that thing that was in the upper right corner, we want it back. Well, if I didn't have a destructive workflow, if I had a destructive workflow, I'd have to start over again, open the file back up, and don't crop it. But then I'd lose all my other edits. Whereas in Lightroom, because it is non-destructive by nature, I can just go back to the crop tool and say, oh, okay, you want that thing back? Let's just reset the crop. There we go. And now I didn't lose the microphone edit. I didn't lose the brightening of the eyes edit. I just got the crop back to the way they wanted it. And now I can move on. That's what a non-destructive workflow gives you, is that ability to go back and change your mind. So for people that say, like Colleen and I, that we don't really ever have to do that because we're the client and typically we're not revisiting our own work over and over again, great, we can work destructively. People that may get that, go back and change something, by all means should work non-destructively. So that's really the answer to the question. It depends on you, your client, who it's for, and how likely there is that you're going to have to go back and do something over again or change something you've done. All right, let's see if I got any questions here. Great, I just see some shout outs from Mikey, and Wedding Market says hi, and the rest of the people are just joining. Let's see if I got any more questions. I think I saw some new ones come in over here. All right, Lightroom share gallery question. Once I'm done, how to delete the gallery and regain my storage quota? Okay, well, that's technically two different things. So Rachel's asking Lightroom gallery share question. Once I'm done, how do I delete the gallery and regain my storage quota? Well, you can turn off sharing. That effectively deletes the gallery from it being shared. But that's not impacting your storage quota. What's really impacting your storage quota are the photos you have in Lightroom CC. So that's really what's determining space being used, not the gallery itself. So let me explain what I mean. Let's pop over to Lightroom CC. And in Lightroom CC, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on this. And here's a gallery that has, as far as I can tell, has not been shared. So if I right click on it, I can say share to web, which means I want to make this gallery available for people to look at on the internet. When I say share to web, it'll generate a custom URL just for these photos, these 24 photos. And I can allow downloads. I can let them see the metadata, where the image was taken, and the metadata from the camera. I can allow filtering, meaning that if I've marked images with a flag, only share those, or star ratings, only share those. But if I don't do anything else, and we'll copy that link, continue, this album has been shared and it's updated in real time. So if I go look at that on the web, which I will right now, those are those 24 photos, and there they are. So if I now come back and say, I'm done sharing that, people have looked at them, no one's looking at them anymore, I'm done, I can always go back to my share settings and I can stop sharing. When you stop sharing, it kills the link, takes it off the internet, and people can't look at those photos or access those photos anymore. But the fact that those 24 photos are in Lightroom CC, that's your store. That's what's taking your storage quota, not whether or not you're sharing it to the web or not. So if you really want to get your storage quota back, you'd have to delete these 24 photos. That would remove them from Lightroom CC. They would be deleted, meaning gone, unless you've got a copy of them somewhere. And that would give you back the storage that they were using, how much ever that is. Now, I got a question for my Lightroom users out here. Let's see if one of the things I wanted to test works. All right, I should have a test for everyone here that's on Facebook. Let's see. Let's see if we can get this to work. If it does, great. All right, I'm going to show a poll. And I am, but that didn't work. Okay, never mind. It's telling me what I must be doing, and I am doing that thing, but it's still not. Okay, never mind. That feature didn't work. Okay, so moving on. So storage quota, it's really the amount of images and videos you have. It's nothing to do with the web gallery. Now, if I, again, don't want to share those anymore, no problem. Right click, stop sharing. The link is disabled, and now they're not shared anymore. While it was live, if I put more photos into it, those photos would get shared to that album. So anyone that has the link would be able to keep looking at them or see the new ones. And if I were to remove photos from the album, those photos would go away from the people that hadn't seen them yet. Is there any way I can do show a mask in Photoshop? Sure. That's a question from Twitter. Let me see, what do I want to mask? Well, it depends on what you mean by mask, but okay, so let's try, let's go back to Photoshop. I've got some photos here, and let's start with, we'll do the wild hair one. And we'll do a background for it. So let me go get my Adobe stock backgrounds, or Adobe from Adobe Live. Let's see if I got any in here. Images. All right, there's a nice sky background. Okay, so I'm going to pull this one into this image. There it is, one I haven't licensed yet. We'll go ahead and scale it proportionally without holding down the Shift key. Great. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and license that image because I don't like it looking all pixelated. All right, confirm. Okay, so that should update. All right, so now we've got two layers. We've got the background and the sky layer. I want to take the Liz layer and just, here, let me undo it. I'm doing things without telling you. So I'm going to click this little padlock that will turn it into a layer, and then I'm just going to simply move it up above the sky layer so that she's on top. All right, so now that I've done that, there we go. And now we want to basically be able to see the sky, which is masking. Now you can do it manually. I don't recommend it, but you could do it manually. You could add a layer mask, which is this button down here in the bottom right-hand corner, add layer mask. And if you add a layer mask and paint with black paint using your paintbrush or any other tool that will fill with black, let's go ahead and make the brush bigger. You can start erasing, or not erasing, you can start masking the background she's on and see the sky through it. And the reason I recommend it is because once you get into the hair, that's going to be hard to do. So let's not do it that way. Instead, and let's undo again, Command Z, Command Z. Great to be able to do that easily and easier in Photoshop. So let's do this way. Let's do a select subject. So I'm just going to switch to my my quick select tool. We're going to hit select subject, which should identify her since she's the only subject in the photo. And it did a great job mostly of her body, but it did a not so great job in the hair. And there's a little bit under the arm that still needs to be subtracted. So let's subtract that out. Okay, great. And we can probably at least cut down to some of this background out of the hair there. And that's pretty much all quick select or select subject is going to do. It's going to identify the subject. The button, the very next button next to select subject at the top is select and mask. That's the mask thing you asked about. So when I hit select and mask, it will give me a preview of what I've got so far. She looks great, but the hair is still the issue because there's background interspersed in her flying windy hair. And what I would now want to do is I want to use my refine edge brush, and I would want to make it a little bigger. And I want to go in and take the plus sign on that brush. Here, let me zoom in and show you. There's a plus sign. And when you hold down the, there it is. When you hold down the option key, you should get a minus symbol. So what I'm going to do is take the plus sign and point it at what used to be the background, the gray, and just start painting in her hair. And it should magically remove that background color from everywhere that it sees it, or everywhere that I paint, I should say. So even when it gets all the way down into there, no problem. Let me zoom out so I can see what I'm doing. And same thing, click. And even if I go across the hair, it's not really touching the hair because the hair is not that color. Now, if the hair was that color, then this probably wouldn't work so well. So I can go in and mask out hair a lot easier with the refine edge brush. And being able to see this as I'm working. And with a lot of this kind of work, it's really about paying attention and making sure you go over all the areas, because there will be areas like this that would be easy to miss. Okay, now and by the way, the other thing too, there was hair that didn't get selected. So you might want to pull away from the hair to make sure you get all of that excess hair that was not part of the original selection. All right, so now when I let go, it'll recalculate that mask. So that's why I'm getting a little spinny thing on my cursor. And it should show the hair off a little bit better, and it did. And if you missed, you can just keep going back through it, and away you go. So now that's what it's giving me a preview of what that will look like. So I would do a couple things. I typically do a smart radius, which is a nice blend between edges that are hard, edges that are soft. Like her shoulder is hard edge, her hair would be soft edge, clothing might be somewhere in the middle. And then last but not least, I've got it -4%, but a little shift edge to the left doesn't hurt either. So out to the right tells it to bring in more of the original background. To the left tells it to kind of cut into the edge just a little bit by whatever percentage you tell it, to kind of get rid of areas that you might have missed or areas that are just too fine for refined edge to get. Then once I'm done, here's the big thing, here's the non-destructive thing, because we do want this to be non-destructive, is we want this to output to a new layer with a layer mask. So that's, otherwise it would default to selection, and that doesn't do you any good. You want new layer with layer mask. Click OK. That will give you, just like it says, there's the original layer, and it gave you a new layer with a layer mask. So if there was anything you missed or anything you wanted to go back and do, you would have the option to work on the mask and fix it. So you can always go back and change it or edit it to your liking. But she is now cut out. If we were to pick her up and move her around, she would be cut off on the right side, so that wouldn't look too good, but she is free from that original background and masked. All right, so good. I'm glad that's exactly what you were looking for. All right, let's see what else. Probably got time for one more. I'm glad you guys are finding this useful. Okay, we already answered that one. I got some new comments on Facebook. Let's see if I can get to a question here. Change the hardness of a brush. So Sadiq is asking, is there a possibility to change the hardness of a brush? Yes, that's a very easy thing to do in Photoshop and has been for years. When you're on a brush, first of all, you can do one of two things. You can pick a brush that's soft or pick a brush that's hard or change the brush that you already have. So if you just click on the brush icon up here, well, first of all, select the brush that you want to work with. Then go up here in the upper left-hand corner and see where it says 700, which represents the size. And I can see that brush is kind of like gradient. That means it's soft. If I were to click up there, that will bring up the brush settings where I can go find just simply find a hard edge brush. So now it's not gradient anymore, it's hard edge. Or I can take the brush I was working on. If I want something in the middle, hardness, I can make it harder or softer just by dragging the slider. So that's how you would change the hardness of a brush. All right. Hello, Zorro. How are you? All right. And hello, Blue Basin. How are you? I'm going to export. What gives with that? All right. So I don't know. So the question is, now again, if you have a tech support question like, hey, I downloaded the app and it doesn't do this thing it's supposed to do, I don't know why. That's what support will do. But I will tell you what the preference is. So Miss Justification says, hey, when I downloaded Lightroom Classic CC, it didn't open up the image in Photoshop. Why not? I don't know why not, but I can tell you where to look. You can go up to your same preferences we were just in. So preferences, and check for external editing. That's the preference you want to be on. And when you go to external editing, it's going to allow you to choose. Oh, okay, there it is. It's going to show you which application it's going to edit in, and you can choose an additional editor if you want. So edit in Adobe Photoshop CC 2019, and if there is an additional editor that I like to work with, like the Nick effects or whatever, I can choose a secondary editor. So some people, for example, have Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, and they sometimes want to work in Elements because it's easier and versus Photoshop, And so they can choose between the editors. But this will show you what editor it's trying to open, and then you can go from there. If that doesn't do it, that's a contact tech support or reinstall type thing. I'm not sure what's wrong. All right. And Worn Out Shoes, thank you for the praise on the videos. And all right, when you share a web gallery, is the quality the same as exporting? Okay, that's a good question. So in Garbage Strew is asking, so when I did that gallery thing earlier in Lightroom CC, and there was a checkbox or a switch to allow downloads, is the download the same quality as the export? And the answer is no, not necessarily. Because when I go to Lightroom and I do an export, if I have the original file, let's be clear, then that could be that 5,000 or 7,000 pixel wide image by 4,000, whatever it was. But when I allow people to download from the web gallery, typically that's going to be a Smart Preview sized image, so 2048 pixels on the longest edge. So I have not tried, I don't think I've tried it with a full res file to see if that would let me do it. Let's see, I think I have a full res file here. Let's go look. Let's go look and see if this one's full res. All right. Nope, that's a Smart Preview. One of these should be full res. Let's check this one. Nope. Trying to find one that says cloud original size. These probably are not. These are not. Ah, this one is. Okay, so this one says original file backed up. All right, so let's do this. Let's do a quick test. Let's create a new album. And we're going to do a new album. We're going to call it Test Web Share or something like that. So Test Web Gallery. All right. Create and include the one selected photo. Great. So it should do that. And there it is, Test Web Gallery. And now I'm going to share it. So let's right click and share this to the web. And let's allow downloads. Okay. So I think we're good. We're going to copy the link to it, continue. And when I look at this file, let's get the information for it again. This image is 16 megabytes. It's a 3,264 image by 4,928. So it will either be that or it'll be 2048 on the longest edge. That's what I'm not sure about. So let's see. All right, let's look at this new gallery, which should only have one image in it. And we did allow people to download. So that's where this download button now happens. And I just told it to download. So first of all, it's going to make a JPEG no matter what the original was. So if the original was a RAW, a TIFF, a PSD, they're going to end up with a JPEG. So let's go show it in the operating system to take a look at it. And let's look at the size of it. It's only 2 megabytes in size. And let's open it up in Photoshop to see the rest. And let's go to image size. It did keep the resolution, but it did save it as a JPEG to make it smaller. So it did at least keep most of that data. So there's the answer. When people download, it will be dependent on what files are actually in the web gallery. So for example, if I go back to Lightroom, go back to one of these, which I know for a fact, like this one is probably just a Smart Preview. Let's see. Yep, the original has been not backed up to the cloud. So let's say I take that photo and I put it in that same album. Okay, and it'll take a second for the cloud to replicate that to the album. So if I go back to the web now and get out of this and refresh, there's a second photo. click on it, lets me download it. I download it, and I go back and look, and this one should not be very big. Yeah, 2048, because it's a smart preview. So it depends on what you give them. So yes, if you have high-res images in your gallery and you allow downloads, they'll be able to download the high-res as a JPEG. If not, they'll get the smart preview size, which is 2048 pixels on the longest edge. All right. Lewis, help with what? So someone says, help, please. Are you in trouble? Do we need to call 911? What do you need help with? All right. And I think we are done, Lewis, unless you can get that question in really quick. Will this live video be uploaded to Behance? It will not be uploaded to Behance, but it will be available on my YouTube channel, on Twitter, and here on Facebook. Just so I'm clear, Lightroom does not really work in layers. Each tool can be reset. Vernon, that's a great description. So Lightroom does not have layers, at least not built in, not what we think of layers like in Photoshop. And yes, any adjustment you make can be reset, can be readjusted. It is not doing any harm or edits to the pixels themselves at any point. So Lightroom, just like Camera Raw, does not edit the actual image. So even if I go into this photo, oh yeah, I was gonna say, how did I get to that one in Photoshop? Let's go back to Lightroom. Even if I go to this photo and I say, oh, I don't really like that other island, that smaller island there, and I go in and I take it out, like that. Let's pick a better place for it to get it from. I take out that album and I come back 6 months from now and say, what the heck was I thinking? That island needs to be there. Quit Lightroom, come back 6 months later, open it back up, go right back to the healing brush, find that spot and delete it. And the island comes right back. So it's non-destructive 100% by nature. The only time it becomes destructive is when you export. And that does bring up one last question that got asked earlier. So it's kind of around the same lines of how do I make a file smaller? Let's say that you're just using Lightroom. You don't use Photoshop, or you're not going to open it in Photoshop. You just want to make a smaller file. I want to give Tony a copy of his picture. Tony is a photographer, so he could open a DNG. But let's say he wasn't. And I wanted to give him a copy of this photo smaller. So this PSD that we flipped around. And by the way, let's go in and do a couple more adjustments to it. Let's go in and make it, so just the white balance on it. And let's see what auto does. Yeah, auto gives me a better shot. And we'll go ahead and bump up the exposure just a little bit. Okay, so I made some adjustments. I flipped it in Photoshop. I've done all this work. I want to give Tony a copy of this. So under Lightroom Classic, it would be export. Under Lightroom CC, it would be, we got that same photo somewhere here. It would be, once it finishes syncing all this, are we in the same album, same collection? We are not. That's why it's not there. Let's go to retouching. There we go. So once that, whatever copy it was, I think it was this one, once this one is synced, which it is, it would be file save to. So save to out of Lightroom CC and export out of Lightroom Classic. So once I do an export, now keep in mind, that's a PSD. It's currently 169 megabytes in size. It's 3,337 on the short edge and 5,000 pixels wide on the tall edge. That's the one I sized down a little bit. So now I want to give Tony a copy you can post on Instagram. Export. So I'm going to do this manually. I've already got a four Instagram set up, but let's do it manually. I'm going to choose to save it to the desktop just so we can get to it quickly. I'm going to use the file format of JPEG, not DNG. I'm going to use sRGB, which looks better on the internet, on the web, on a screen than, let's say, Adobe RGB or Pro. If I were going to send a high-res version of print, I would use either Adobe RGB 1998, probably 90% of the time, or Pro Photo. Quality, That's up to you. I tend to want my images to look good on the internet, especially since Facebook and a lot of other places compress the heck out of them. So I'll start with something higher and then resize. So for example, Instagram wants nothing longer than 1080 pixels wide or long. So I would just say, make the longest edge 1080 at 72 pixels per inch. Whether I want to include the metadata, copyright only, copyright and contact info, that's up to me. And then show it to me when you're done. So export. Here it comes. There it is. There's the photo. It's only 331K versus 100 megabytes. Very easy to email. And if I were to open this up in Photoshop and we look at the dimensions, it shouldn't be any longer or bigger than 1080 on the longest edge. So that's a very manageable file for Tony to work with. Still looks good at 100%. Here, let's go here. So haven't really lost a lot visually on screen, but this would not be high res enough usually to print. But for that, it would be great. How do you set up your photo to print at the printer so colors come out the best? Color profile stuff, that's going to take longer than the 2 seconds over that we already are, but I would say work with your printer. So send them a test file first. I already mentioned some of this already, so in Lightroom or Photoshop, I would tend to want to export these out if I'm sending this for print using the color space of RGB 1998. I would not resize it. I would want the full resolution of the file that it is, 100% quality. Because remember, they're the bigger, the better for print. And then I would export that out as a JPEG, 100% quality, Adobe RGB 1998. Now, and again, color profiling, if the colors have to match, this is what I always tell people. If I'm wearing a blue shirt and it looks blue when I get the print back, I'm happy. But if this is forward blue or a specific blue and it has to be that specific blue, that's a whole different world. That is color profiling. That is working with the profile you got from the printer, which you could add to Photoshop or Lightroom, Classic CC. And that's you working that relationship out. That's not something I can tell you what to do because every printer is different. But if you want blue to look like blue, follow these steps and it should be okay. If blue has to match this exact blue, that's when you want to work with the printer directly. Okay, that is it. I hope I answered as many of the questions as I possibly could, and I hope you guys got something out of this. How do you tether a Sony A7R3 to Lightroom? You have to work that out with Sony because natively we support Leica, Canon, Nikon, and I think that's about it. So otherwise, the plugin has to come from the manufacturer. So with that said, cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. If I don't talk to you again, happy holidays. And let's see, I guess we're not doing it that way. All right, let's go here and do it this way. All right, again, happy holidays. And thanks for coming, everybody. Tomorrow, I will be on the Lightroom channel on Facebook and, of course, Twitter and YouTube like I am right now. And I'll be talking about what's new for the December 2018 update for Lightroom CC and Lightroom Classic CC. So we'll get a chance to see both of those. All right, and thanks for indulging me in my testing. So the things I was working on kind of worked out the way I wanted them to. You're welcome, you're welcome, we're welcome. And all right. Bye, everybody. Cheers. Happy holidays. Catch you on the next one.